Hey Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Nick. Podcast Friday. Here we are.
Podcast Friday on a holiday weekend. Doesn't get better
Holiday
than that,
weekend.
right?
And you have, I know this that most of this is for podcasts, so most people won't see the amazing like pre-weekend shirt you have
Oh
on,
yeah.
which just screams it's a holiday weekend.
This
So I
is
love it.
my birthday shirt. Getting ready for
Yeah.
the holiday. My birthday's this weekend.
Party on, Wayne.
Gotta I'm wearing these shirts so I can wait and see if somebody comments on our YouTube. I want to see if anybody's paying
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah. We'll find out real quick. All right.
So we are back with another installment of retirement headlines, Dave. Just
Yeah.
an overview of what you and I have been reading with some comments on it to hopefully help point our listeners in a direction and kind of bring some sanity back to some of the stuff that's out there in the news.
Right.
So, of course, we're starting with a Wall Street Journal article on personal finance. Surprisingly, though, it is about insurance coverage, specifically umbrella insurance,
Yeah.
and kind of how things are changing. So, I guess first, umbrella insurance is typically, well, not typically, it is personal liability insurance, and the umbrella portion is your auto insurance and your homeowner's insurance have personal liability amounts, and an umbrella
hmm
policy covers over and above that, whether you're in your car or something happens in your house, right?
Right. And this article brings up some interesting points on the double whammy of insurance in this context, or inflation in this context.
Yeah.
So the claims have gotten bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So you're more likely to need your umbrella insurance because the coverage on your auto policy hasn't necessarily the liability portion isn't inflated with
Right.
inflation. So now claims are spilling over into the realm of umbrella policies. But what's happened at the same time with umbrella policies? We've
Costs
seen
have
the
gone up,
premiums go up.
right?
Right,
Yeah, because
right.
there's
So
more claims.
you need the coverage more. And well, right. And in the insurance realm, it's like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's not just
Yeah.
inflation for inflation's sense. If they're using it more, then it's going to
Right.
cost more.
Yeah, and
So
I think one of the examples in here, which kind of made a lot of sense, is like if you're in an auto accident, like if you have 250,000 liability, that's not going very far. And
right.
I can't remember in my career. I think those 250, 500 has
It's
kind of been the standard since I
yeah.
started like almost 20 years ago.
Yeah,
So
I was thinking about that too. I don't remember it being any different.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. So yes, you probably need umbrella insurance, and it's probably going to cost you more. Is kind of the main takeaways, right?
But you still, yeah.
Inflation strikes again.
Yeah, and we always talk insure the big things that you can't survive them
Right.
happening, and that still qualifies, if not more now more than ever. So
Right. Yeah. Much,
yeah,
when you think of like an auto policy, much less important is getting your $500 door ding fixed. Much more important is, hey, my teenage driver got into an accident and now they're trying to sue me for, $1 million. Right.
right.
Like, much more catastrophic than getting your door ding fixed. So,
So what's going on with the Yoders this month?
yes, our favorite retirees, right?
Right, they've been doing this ongoing series of articles for the Wall Street Journal on their own retirement. They were finance writers originally, if I recall correctly.
Think he was,
He
yeah.
was, yeah, with the Wall Street Journal. And so in retirement, they are doing a regular post to the Wall Street Journal about different aspects of their retirement. I think it's been great.
Hmm. Yeah, so it looks like they are trying to maintain their health during retirement and doing some preventative care
Right.
stuff. And actually, you and I had an interesting conversation about a book that relates to this. And the name is escaping me.
I outlive.
Outlive. There it is. Yep.
And when I read this article a month ago, long story short, they're talking about how they want to preserve their own health in retirement, and they have some doctors in the family, so they've been asking advice from them. Um, Avoid falls, eat healthy. None of it was earth shattering difference, but they meant the daughter, I believe, was a doctor,
Okay.
recommended the book Outlive, by the author's last name is Attia, Attia. And I went and ordered it after I read this article, and I'm halfway through it, and it is really, really good. It is really good. So,
Yeah, I started it, but I had to give it back to the library and haven't had a chance to
mhm,
recheck it out yet. So,
yeah.
book
Well,
review coming, but very
I'll,
very good principles around like,
yeah.
thinking how we think about longevity, right?
Right. Well, yeah. In a nutshell, and their article touches on this too. We think about longevity, but we don't think about healthgevity, and the
Mm-hmm.
fact that what you really want is to live a long time and be able to do all the things you want to do
Right.
during that time,
Yeah.
and not have that, like, I think he calls it in the book, the beginning of the book, the lost decade that most
Mm-hmm.
people have, where you're still functionally, living, but not able to necessarily enjoy
Right.
life because of heart conditions, because of weight, because of diabetes. So it's a good read. I think it applies to people in retirement as well as, like, I wish I'd read it 15, 20 years ago,
Yeah.
probably 30 years ago, actually, to be
Better late than
honest.
never, Dave.
But here we go. Right, right. So I have a feeling you and I are going to read that book to completion here, and probably we could do a whole
Yeah,
episode on it, because
for
it's very,
sure.
people expect us just to talk about money, but what's the point of retirement goals if you don't enjoy, if you're not healthy enough to enjoy them?
Yeah, right. Well, and the flip side of that too is one of the conversations we always have around retirement is health insurance costs, right? Like,
Right.
how much is health going to cost me?
Yeah.
And we should be asking, like, how much money do I need to like do the,
Yeah.
like the basic activities of living healthy, not necessarily the cost of like
Right.
preventative
Right.
care kind of
Yeah.
thing.
The best long term care policy is not needing to go into a nursing home.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So anyway,
Very true.
uh,
So, our next article is retirement savings rule changes from the Wall Street
yeah.
Journal, talking about RMD rules and penalties. What do we got going on there?
So new rules taking effect here going into 2026, 2025, 2026. Um, some changes around Roth contributions to retirement plans, getting rid of RMD requirements on Roth portions in 401k plans if you don't roll those over. Some interesting things there. Um, it is interesting. One of the things they're doing is lightening up the penalties on missed required minimum distributions,
Mm-hmm.
and from a hefty 50% of the tax that would have been due as a penalty on top of that to, I believe, 10%.
Okay.
But the thing that, like, waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? Um, I've known a few people that have been in a position where technically that penalty would have applied, but you can appeal it. And I have never, ever seen anyone, and I've never talked to another advisor or CPA who has known anyone who's ever actually paid that penalty.
Right. Yeah.
So
Same.
my
Same
question is,
here.
like, are they lowering the penalty, but are they then going to enforce it more?
Right. Yeah.
So that they end up, making more revenue. Be interesting to see. They don't, of course, didn't put that in the new
Right.
regulations. So,
Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me because, why change it if it wasn't,
right.
if you didn't want to actually start assessing it?
Yeah. They were careful too. And the article points this out. They did keep the appeals process the same. There's a form you fill out that says, hey, I missed my RMD because of these
Right.
reasons. And that part is all that's still the same. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So one of our favorite topics on this podcast is what's going on with the 60/40 portfolio.
Yeah.
According to Morningstar, 60/40 portfolio is back, baby.
Oh, big sigh of relief. Yeah. Yeah. Turns out that things don't change as much as people think they will. And so for context, because not everybody's probably been listening to us for 2 years talk about this, in 2022, and this has been ongoing in our entire careers, but in 2022, bonds were down, stocks were down, articles all over the place. The 60/40 portfolio, the typical balanced portfolio, is dead,
Mhm.
right? because it didn't
Right.
work for that like 6 month period in 2022.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, now with more normal market conditions, when we had the big market interruption, if you will, in July, the 60/40 portfolio did pretty well in that bonds performed, were up when stocks were down, and provided some protection, right?
Yeah. Did what it was supposed to do.
Right. Right. And it's interesting that, every time there's a change in the markets, the financial media acts like it's a whole new paradigm.
Right.
Um, and, what worked for 75 years of 100 years of market history, all of a sudden, there's 6 months where it doesn't look great. So obviously, it's the end of history as we know it.
Yeah.
Um, and what do you know? 18 months later, we're right back to norms of market conditions. And I think that's the big takeaway here. It's not the technical details of how and why bonds and stocks did what they did in the short run or in 2022. It's that sometimes these rules are rules for a reason.
Right.
And what's a rule of thumb usually holds. And that's actually going to be a good segue into our next article.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because before we get into the next one, it's interesting just because nothing works all the time, right?
Right,
Like
right.
there's always uncertainty. If there wasn't, everybody would just invest in a 60/40 portfolio and life would go on, right?
Right,
Like
right.
nothing's ever going to
Absolutely.
work all the time. And there's always going to be times where, the market conditions just kind of create this perfect storm where stocks and bonds are down at the same time. And that's just life as an investor, right?
Right,
Just
right,
bumps in the road.
right. So, and I guess, I said our next article, I think we should maybe skip down to the one on the 60/40 and the 4% withdrawal rate and then come
Oh, there you
back.
go. Yep.
Um,
So no
because,
sooner is the 60/40 back. The Wall Street
so
Journal comes out with an article that says the 60/40 portfolio and a 4% withdrawal rate could lead to disaster.
it could. And with the subtitle on the article, if markets behave differently than in the past.
Right.
And yes, that's absolutely true. If markets behave differently than they have in the past, the 4% rule, which, basically, we're talking about if you retire and plan to withdraw 4% of your portfolio as your starting income from your portfolio in a 60% stock, 40% bond asset allocation in every past market cycle, that has been shown to work, right?
Right.
And so the Wall Street Journal article, and in some ways, I like this. They're basically saying, not so fast. You're basing this on history. In some of those, it was really close. And if history doesn't, the market doesn't necessarily have to behave the way it always has. And that's true. That's why there's risk in the market.
Right.
That's,
Yep.
that's, we accept that. We, we know that things may not work out as they have in the past. But in the long run, those are the way markets have behaved have a lot to do with the economy overall and, growth statistically, cycling in and out. And sure, it may not look like it has in the past, but what are the odds of it being horribly different?
Right. Yeah. Well, and the other thing I was thinking as I was reading this article too is, and we say this a lot of times when we're going through like an original plan with
Hmm.
people, like the assumption is that you're going to have a 60/40 portfolio with a 4% withdrawal rate.
And
Watch your
never,
money continue to go down and never make any
right, and never
adjustments, right?
change. Right, right. And yeah, so flexibility is a
Yeah.
big thing. And the other thing is, like, we've talked about this a lot. When we talk about rules of thumb, whether it's how much you should have in a contingency fund or whether you should use a target date portfolio, those kind of things. These are often what we would talk to people about if we're never going to see them again and we don't know all the details of their situation.
Right.
Okay. 4% withdrawal rate will probably work for most people in most situations. But if you're uncomfortable with that amount of risk because you think things may not play out in the past, then that it's perfectly valid to say no. In my situation, I'd rather go with a 3% withdrawal rate,
Yeah.
or I tend to think things are going to be at least as good, if not better than in the past. And maybe I'm more than happy to go through life with a little higher withdrawal rate. That's what personal financial planning is all about.
Yeah, it's so true, and every situation is different. And rules of thumb are always great places to start, but there's a lot more, digging in that you need to do to figure out how
Right.
it's going to suit you, and if it really is going to be what you need, right?
Right. Right.
So let's go back up to our friend at
Yes.
Morningstar, Christine Benz.
Yes. More about the 60-40-40 portfolio. So Christine Benz, she talks about the fact that, hey, if you started out with a 60-40 split 10 years ago and you haven't rebalanced or done anything different, you're probably more like 80-20 now, right?
Yeah.
So now with markets having been good, it's a good time to rebalance.
Yep. Yeah. In which, theoretically, we're big fans of, not theoretically, we are big fans of rebalancing on a
Right.
regular basis. But, if you started in an 60-40 portfolio and did nothing, like I said, you're going to be at 80-20. And the problem with
Hmm.
that is now you have a lot more risk than maybe you're comfortable with.
Right.
And also you're 10 years closer to your like retirement date, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Double-edged sword there where,
Yeah.
both those things are working to
Yeah.
conspire if there
And
is a
then
market problem. Yeah.
right, and then the age old better to be lucky than good. You got
Hmm.
lucky,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And now's a great time to realize that and set your risk
Cash
and
in.
allocation to
Yeah.
where you want to be, knowing that you're 10 years closer to retirement. And
Yeah.
market, it's a great time to be selling stocks and buying bonds and getting that relationship back to where you want from a risk standpoint.
Right. The difference now in taking risk out of stocks and buying safer assets, which usually means bonds, is that since 2022, now bond yields are higher relative to their prices. And that trade off in expected return isn't as bad as it would have been in like 2018.
Right. Yeah.
So take advantage.
Indeed. Let's see. Our next article comes from the Detroit Free Press, actually, Dave.
Mm,
And apparently now is a good time to buy used cars.
yeah. Yeah. Well, or relatively at least compared to what we've seen since 2020.
Yeah, so with all the talk about inflation, we had to throw something in here about the deflation of
Hmm.
the used car market. And this is very short term, but there's some cool stats in this article about, let's see, according to Edmunds, second quarter prices of 2024 are 7% lower, especially in the EV market. So if you're looking for an EV, apparently now is the time to buy a
Right.
used EV, or hybrid cars have gone down a little bit more than traditional used vehicles.
Yeah.
Looks like, I
Yeah.
think according to this, the used EV electric vehicles had a 20% decline from 33 down to 40, or from
Hmm.
42 down to 33, which is crazy if you think about it.
Yeah, and I see the decline in the hybrids isn't as much, and there was actually some interesting stuff in the news this morning about the surprising demand for plug-in hybrids that
Yeah.
auto manufacturers didn't necessarily expect. So that kind of is reflected in that differential there.
Yeah, it's interesting, with figuring out, where you want to be from that standpoint. I think part of the good news about used car prices coming down is inventories of new cars are back up to normal,
Hmm.
and then now we have more used cars as a result of that as well. So it's kind of
Yeah,
a all around prices go up and prices come down, right?
it's all about supply and demand at the end of the day.
That's right.
So there you go.
Let's see. Going back to the Wall Street Journal, there was an article about how to plan for retirement if you're behind on savings, which I thought
Yeah.
was interesting. We normally talk a lot about like, hey, you're 40, pushing 50, and you haven't done a whole lot of savings and not feeling good about it. What do I do now, right?
Right. And I thought this was a good list and an interesting list of ideas, but I also loved what wasn't on there. So, you know, things to consider if you're behind. The author points out, you can delay your retirement. You can plan to work part-time in retirement. These are all things we talk to clients about. You
Yep.
can be strategic about when you take Social Security. Generally,
Hmm.
that means delaying it. You
Yep.
can look to downsize your house, use equity, home equity. A lot of times when, folks that are just planning retirement that come in our office, I've always thought most of them were pretty reluctant to, like, I don't like to put home equity into the planning in the right off the bat unless things don't work.
Yeah. That's a
Because
good
most,
point.
we've usually treated it as like that's going to be the ace in the hole if the plan doesn't work down the road.
Yeah, it's interesting for those that joined us with Cole last week. We talked about like
Hmm.
how home ownership has been this like framed as this cornerstone of building wealth. But the interesting
Right.
part is you build wealth in your home and then nobody ever wants to use
Right.
it.
Right. There's a lot to unpack there. Yeah. Yeah. But if you are being realistic about your financial situation and you have not saved enough, chances are home equity might be that ticket to being able to retire when you need to.
Yeah, and it does. There's a couple different ways to slice that up too, and we've helped clients do it both ways, right? Downsizing and or using the equity in the form of
Right.
some sort of reverse mortgage type of product where you can stay in
Right.
your house, but then you get to use the equity out of it.
Right. Right. What's not on the list, I think, is the thing to point out here. There's nothing on there about trying to take more risk in the market to try to close that gap.
Right.
And I think occasionally we'll have those conversations with someone who's new to us, and that often seems to be like they think I shouldn't, be careful with broad brushes and stereotypes, but people tend to think that the key is to make the investment portfolio right, and that will
Right.
fix it. And at the
Yeah.
end of the day, you're still bound by long-term expectations. We can't, you don't want to take a bunch of speculative risk
Right.
because you're just as likely to make the situation worse as
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I mean, it's a great point because as Americans, we have a predisposition to the easy answer, right? We
right,
don't want to diet and exercise. We want to take the pill, right? Like,
right, right,
and there's no easy, quick fix. Like, there's no like, hey, like put money in this stock and it'll do
right.
fine, and then we'll be able to retire, even though we haven't done all the things leading up to this, like spend less than what we make and save and invest for the long term. So
Yeah,
I agree with you. It was nice not to see that in there.
yeah. So Ben Carlson over at the Wealth of Common Sense blog, he's quickly becoming one of my favorite personal finance writers.
Love it.
And he, his latest piece was on how to predict a recession. And he's right in line. He's like what I want to say without a filter. I love it.
Right.
And but his points are, it feels like we're overdue. A lot of people are worried that we're heading into a recession just based on time, right? Because the
Right.
average length of time between in the market cycle would say we would have a recession every 7 years, and we have been in recession, as he points out, 2 months out of the last 15 years.
Yeah.
Those 2 months being right around the COVID
Right.
crash. So it feels like we're overdue. And he then lists a whole slew of headlines from the last 2 years saying things, from Jamie Dimon and Elon Musk and Amazon's new CEO, and that we'll be in a recession by spring of 2024.
Right.
Those kind of headlines. And yet, here are people that the average person is going to think they've got their thumb on the pulse of the American economy, right?
Right.
But they're very wrong,
Yeah.
or they've been very wrong. But on the other hand, we will eventually have another recession. And
Right.
so the point is, don't try to time it, don't try to predict it, just prepare for the eventual. And Ben says eventuality. I would replace that with an inevitability of a
Mm-hmm.
recession rather than try to predict its onset.
Yeah. No, it's great advice. I mean, even the best economists in the world can't predict, you know.
Right.
So, like, what, there's no point in you and I trying to do it.
Yeah.
Let's just like prepare for it and know that it's going to come and be ready for it, right? Like,
Yeah.
but don't like do things expecting it to be here tomorrow.
That
Very
is the way.
good. So our last article is from Morningstar again, talking about their latest study on the investor return gap. Want to dive us through what that means, Dave?
Yeah, so basically on a high level, looking at what the average returns for different groups of funds have been over different periods of time and comparing that to the actual return investors enjoy from that,
Mm-hmm.
um, which really has to do with the fact that when they publish returns for a particular mutual fund, it's assuming you put a lump sum in on the day that their tracking starts and you take it out on the day the tracking ends,
Right.
and that's not our realities, right? We'll put money
Right.
in, we might add a little more the next month, then 3 months later, if something comes up and we pull money out. I mean, not our clients, but in general,
Right.
and and your individual investor return doesn't necessarily match what the funds are showing, and some of that is behavioral, right? Making
Right.
mistakes and at buying and selling at the wrong times or trying to time things.
Yeah, it was interesting. Well, one of the big points of this article was that people that kept it simple by basically choosing allocation funds did a little bit better than,
Yeah.
somebody that's buying sector funds. But I also thought they did a good job of like prefacing that with a lot of those allocation funds are in 401ks plans and
Hmm.
there's dollar cost averaging. And so that skews a lot of the results too.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I guess for most people, I wouldn't get too bogged down in the details of the statistics they provide because a lot of it is contextual.
right. For
But
sure.
the overall point is basically don't screw around with your portfolio if you don't have to, because
Yeah.
odds are you're going to just be hurting yourself.
Right. And
And
furthermore, understand that from a behavioral standpoint, you're going to have these emotional highs and lows,
yeah,
and you're going to have to either learn how to deal with them on yourself or work with a professional that can help talk you through them.
right, right, right. You know, invest your money and lose your password is probably if
Yeah,
you're going to do it yourself, that's the best approach.
there you go. I love it. I love it. Well, that is our list for this month, Dave. It has been a pleasure, sir.
Good
If
stuff.
our listeners have any articles they'd like us to review, we would love to do that. Shoot us an email at info@srbadvisors.com. Dave, as always, it has been a pleasure, my friend.
Have a great birthday. Have a great holiday weekend.
Thanks, Dave.
Talk to you later.
This is a Zedia Media production.